My name is Kelly.
And my name is Will.
We are two Florida attorneys
Who love our 5 dogs.
and 2 cats.
And love listening to true crime.
Mainly me.
So I hope you enjoy our show as we delve into all things spooky.
This is For Crime's Sake.
Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. We are back from our week off, and we have Lydia in the studio with us today.
Yeah, and we hate to start the show on a sad note, but we do want to share some bad news now so that it won't be so hard later on. And that is that Lydia is not in good health. She had been losing weight inexplicably for a while now, and after a few rounds of blood testing, the vet told us this week that they really can't treat her any further. They believe it is cancer, and that there's really just nothing we can do except make her comfortable. And it's been really hard.
It has.
And, you know, we took Lydia on as a senior dog, and we knew that we probably wouldn't have a ton of time with her. And our decision to adopt her wasn't really about doing something for us, but more to give her a home to live out the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Where she would be loved and, you know, feeling secure and safe.
And we've been able to do that for her, and that has been a very rewarding thing. And it's sad, but this is what we set out to do.
And the good news is that she seems right now to feel relatively normal. She still loves to eat. She loves hanging out with, Will and I and her fur siblings. And she loves sitting in the backyard and going for her walks. So,
yeah. So this week we don't have any real priority on the docket other than for both of us to spend some time with our pets, and
especially Lydia.
Especially Lids.
And make sure that they know how important they are to us.
Absolutely.
So with all that being said, let's get into this week's episode. Sources for this week's episode include the Associated Press, WJXT, and CBS News. And this week's episode is the murder of Maddie Clifton. So I just want to say that this case hits close to home for us, literally.
Literally it does.
Both Will and I are from an area not too far from where this case takes place, and Maddie was very close to our age. We both remember when this happened because it consumed not only our area, but the whole nation.
Yeah.
There are even people associated with this case that we've known and interacted with in our lives and, careers as attorneys. So this case, with all that being said, this case has impacted us differently from any other case we've covered so far.
And it was interesting for me because when you first told me what we were doing, which episode we were doing, the name didn't sound familiar immediately. But as soon as I heard these facts, I remembered this. I remembered when this happened. That said, we were children when this happened, and we don't have any kind of special or inside knowledge about any of these events just because we have known and been tangentially around some of these people. We've just experienced this one a little differently.
This one is a case that is also different because it has been solved. The wheels of justice, though, are still in motion to this day. And there have been important legal developments since the beginning of this story, which we're going to go into later in this episode. Madeline Clifton was born on June 17th, 1990 in Jacksonville, Florida, the youngest daughter of Steve and Sheila Clifton. She had one sister named Jessie, who was 3 years older than her, and the four made a beautiful, happy family who enjoyed spending time together going fishing, taking family vacations, and simply enjoying each other's company.
It's a lovely picture.
Yes. Maddie, who was 8 years old at the time, was known to be a sweet and energetic little girl. She enjoyed playing outside, loved sports, and she was a gifted piano player. But most of all, she was gentle. Her family has said that she always wanted to protect and support people who were sad and lonely. And listen to this. Apparently, even watching scary movies and TV shows, she would often side with the monster or the bad guy because she didn't like the idea of anyone or anything feeling alone.
So she was the little girl who would have watched The Thing and been rooting for The Thing the whole time.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
Very sweet. Then on November 3rd, Maddie was suddenly and brutally taken from her family and her loved ones. So November 3rd, 1998 was election day for that year's midterm elections. Sheila Clifton, Maddie's mom, came home from voting and found Maddie excitedly wanting to play outside until dinner, which was very much in character for her.
Well, she was a little sports star. She played everything.
Yep. Her mother agreed, and Maddie rushed out of the house to play. At some point, she was hitting golf balls down the street and came back to the house to grab more.
I'm just picturing this little 8-year-old girl hitting golf balls.
I know. But that, unfortunately, was the last time Maddie was seen alive. When Maddie didn't come home for dinner and her family couldn't find her anywhere, they immediately called police and everybody mobilized to search. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody.
Seriously, this was everything.
Oh, yes. First and foremost, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, under then Sheriff Nat Glover, put every resource they could behind the search in an absolutely commendable response to this tragedy. But they weren't alone. There are pictures of Maddie's classmates, other 7 and 8-year-old children, out walking with posters, passing out flyers, doing whatever they could to help.
I mean, how sweet, but how sad that these little kids were looking for their friend. I mean,
I know.
It kills me.
But it's a great showing for the community to gather behind this family during such a difficult time, too.
Absolutely.
Cheerleaders from a local high school passed out flyers to fans outside of the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium on game day. And just for any Jaguar fans out there, they played the Bengals that game and won 24-11.
And I think went 11-5 that season under Mark Brunell and Tom Coughlin.
Yeah. The Cliftons, and I guess we should say go Jags.
Yes, go Jags.
The Cliftons, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and pretty much all of Jacksonville were out looking for Maddie. Even the National Guard was deployed to walk the sewers throughout the city.
And that just blows my mind because we've done several missing persons cases. And I mean, how often does this kind of response come up? This was amazing.
This case struck a chord. And that's what it shows, right? It struck a chord with so many people. And part of the reason is that everyone could connect with Maddie and with her family. She could have been anyone's child, and the community treated her disappearance as though she were. And tragically, the search ended just 7 days later, on November 10th, 1998, in one of the last places anyone would have thought to look. And I don't know if you do, but I actually remember this. My birthday is November 30th, and I remember this happening around my birthday.
Yeah.
Growing up.
I didn't really remember the time frame, but what I most remembered, and we'll talk more later, but what I most remembered is just the feeling and feeling fear.
Yeah. Melissa Phillips, or Missy, and her family lived in the same neighborhood as the Cliftons. On the morning of November 10th, 1998, Missy Phillips walked into the bedroom of her 14-year-old son, Joshua Phillips, where she noticed a wet spot on the floor.
And that's never something you hope to find in a 14-year-old boy's room.
No, there's a lot of possibilities there. Joshua had already gone to school for the day. So, Missy's in there tidying up, cleaning up. I mean,
doing mom things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 14-year-old boy's room. Probably not great.
No, I doubt it.
Missy initially thought the wet spot might be coming from her son's waterbed mattress, so she decided to investigate further, which led her to a grisly and heartbreaking discovery. Missy Phillips found the decaying body of 8-year-old Maddie Clifton stuffed underneath her son's mattress.
I mean, that is just one of the most horrifying things I've ever heard. I can't begin to fathom.
No, and it's like the morning. I mean, this is like, you're just like probably, puttering around doing, regular chores that you have to do, and you're not expecting that.
No, I mean...
Especially your 14-year-old. It's not even like, he was like an adult.
Yeah, like a 25-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, it's... No.
This is a young teen.
A kid.
Yeah.
I mean, add Missy Phillips to the name of victims in this case, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Because Missy did an incredibly brave, selfless, and honestly just shockingly difficult thing. She immediately ran across the street to the Cliftons' house. Steve and Sheila, Maddie's parents, had just finished giving an interview to a national news outlet, and the house was busy with cameras and law enforcement.
Something that had pretty much become the norm during that week.
Yeah. And Missy immediately sought out a police officer and told him what she found. Which I can't even imagine how hard that must have been for her to have to do. I mean, you know.
I mean, the idea of having to even consider the fact that your child could be not only involved, but capable of doing something like that, and then to act on that.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's like the thing, the position I don't think any parent would want to find themselves in. And a question of like, what do you do if you find yourself in that situation? It's like a question you never want to have to answer.
No, it's a horrific thing for a parent to have to confront. And the fact that she not only confronted it, but acted so decisively in response to it is, I mean, it's incredible. It's hard, but incredible.
So when police entered Josh's room, they could see Maddie's feet sticking out from under the mattress.
Oh my God.
As they investigated the scene, officers found a baseball bat with blood on it hidden behind Josh's dresser. They found his tennis shoes covered in blood, and Maddie's shorts and underwear, which had been removed, they were found near her body.
And that is an interesting point of this that's going to come up a few more times.
And I think also just the baseball bat still had blood on it, right?
Yeah.
The shoes still had blood on it. I mean, and that is, honestly, that's the mind of a child, right? Generally not very good at concealing evidence of crimes. And in this case, I was on.
You have spent a lot of time representing juveniles and have had the opportunity to see that mindset. So it is...
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But among the most heartbreaking discoveries made that day was Maddie's hand tightly grasped around the bed frame, showing she was still alive when she was stuffed beneath the mattress. And that, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it really is.
Not that any of it isn't heartbreaking, but somehow that makes it feel so much worse.
Yeah. And I think what is so sad is she was just so close. She was across the street from her parents.
Playing outside in her own neighborhood.
Yes. And how often growing up we do that?
All the time.
Exactly. I remember like my brothers and I, we were fortunate to live in a neighborhood growing up where there were a lot of kids the same age as my brothers and I, and we would spend hours outside all playing at each other's houses, riding bikes around the neighborhood.
Me and one of my neighbors used to literally play golf around the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so sad.
So sad. So Joshua Phillips was arrested at school later that day, and he immediately confessed to his crimes within hours of his arrest. According to Phillips, Maddie came over to his house on the afternoon of November 3rd to see if he wanted to play baseball.
Which Maddie wanting to hang out with people and play sports.
Josh agreed, despite the fact that he was not supposed to have friends over when his parents weren't home. And this was especially true for little girls. And it's a strange fact, and we'll actually put a pin in this because we're going to come back to it. So this next bit is according to Joshua Phillips. So his story is he accidentally hit Maddie in the face with the baseball that they were playing with, and she started crying. He said he then took her inside the house, but that she still wouldn't stop crying, which, I mean, she was hit, according to this, with a baseball. Which,
yeah, I mean, I'd probably be crying too.
Yeah.
But also this whole confession, it goes back to what you said, the mind of a child. It's so interesting to hear it in that context.
Joshua knew his father, Steve, would be home any minute. And he was very concerned about this because he couldn't let his dad find out that he was playing with his young neighbor. And especially that he'd hurt her while they were playing. There was a strict, no playing, only chores after school type of thing.
Especially a little girl.
Yep. Fearing his dad's retribution, Josh explained that he grabbed his baseball bat and struck Maddie in the head once or twice to quiet her. An autopsy, though, would later reveal that Maddie had been struck 3 times in the head. Joshua then dragged Maddie upstairs to his bedroom before returning downstairs to talk to his dad. I mean, that is just absolutely horrific, right? I mean, the dad's downstairs and he's committing a heinous act upstairs, so
murdering
close.
His neighbor.
His younger neighbor. I mean, it's awful.
It's crazy.
Joshua went on to explain that he could still hear Maddie moaning from his room.
It kills me.
I know, even after hitting her with the bat. So he returned to his bedroom and then stabbed her in the chest 7 times with a knife from a Leatherman tool before finally shoving her beneath his mattress.
And she was still alive.
I know.
Following all of it. I mean,
that's just awful.
It destroys me. And it shows you why this case has gotten so much attention over the years.
Well, they're both juveniles, and honestly,
the facts are heinous.
The facts are heinous. They're both and they're children.
Yeah,
right.
It's wild. It's so bad.
Joshua was questioned about Maddie's shorts and underwear, which investigators initially believed to be evidence suggesting this was a sexually motivated crime. But Joshua denied any sexual assault. And the autopsy would later confirm that there was no evidence of sexual assault. And Josh explained that Maddie's shorts and underwear came off while he was dragging her to his bedroom.
And it's an interesting piece of evidence. We're going to talk about it again when we come to the trial. There's probably nothing more there because there was no physical evidence of sexual assault, but it's odd.
And it does make it makes it just so much, in some way, worse, right? You have this little girl who's being brutally murdered, and now she's ending up without her clothes. I mean, this is it's disgusting,
that last little
honestly.
bit of dignity.
Exactly.
It's awful.
And it doesn't get any better, unfortunately, because for the next 7 days, Joshua Phillips would go on living his life as though nothing happened. He brought a bunch of air fresheners into his bedroom, as well as air freshener spray and incense, all in an effort to conceal the smell of her decomposing body. And he slept on the bed, on the mattress that she was stuffed under. I mean, it's just absolutely it's horrifying. I don't even know.
That's the
it's
part.
Wild.
That's the fact out of all of this that 7-year-old me internalized.
Yeah.
That's the part that when we went back to revisit this, that's what pulled me back to it. That's what I remember.
No, it's just you would have thought even it would have been oh, I can't sleep in my bedroom today. I'm going to sleep on the couch. None of that. It was no, everything was totally fine.
Yeah, it just went on going like nothing.
Jeez. And Joshua even joined in the search efforts for Maddie. And that's unfortunately not that uncommon in some cases.
It's a weird thing, and in this case was no exception. I think they even found one of the flyers that had been being handed out in his bedroom.
God.
I know.
Joshua told investigators he lived that week in denial about what he'd done, saying, "I was putting myself in a fantasy world that nothing had happened. That was my defense mechanism for everything when I was a kid. I never made the decision to ignore it. I just did." And that's, I mean...
For 7 nights, he slept on the body of his dead young neighbor. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
On November 19th, 1998, after being presented with a plethora of physical evidence and a confession, a Jacksonville grand jury returned an indictment charging Joshua Phillips with first-degree murder. Further compounding the gravity of the situation, Phillips would be tried as an adult, despite being only 14 at the time.
And that, again, not that unusual when you have facts these aggressively bad.
Yes. The case would later be moved out of Duval County due to the widespread reporting of the facts and the almost ubiquitous familiarity with the case throughout the community, which is also not super unusual.
No, especially when it's been heavily reported on. The idea you want to give someone a fair trial and not have jurors walking in with preconceived notions because they've seen and heard things on the news.
And that's honestly, in a case that got this much attention, it was going to be hard no matter where you went.
It would have been so hard.
But, it's honestly kind of helps out in the long run for appellate issues and stuff. And I think you never want the cases to come back if you're the state. So for stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. You want to make sure you do it right the first time.
Yep. And the trial of Joshua Phillips started the following year in 1999, which is really quick with this type of serious crime. I mean, you generally don't see homicides being tried this quickly.
And think about how quickly this moved. They arrested him and 9 days later had that indictment and a trial within the following year. It was less than a year.
They had a lot of facts to work with.
They did.
But yeah.
But yeah, it was fast.
Yeah. At trial, the state argued not just that Joshua murdered Maddie, but that he lied to investigators about what happened that day. Specifically, prosecutors pointed out that Maddie's body showed no signs of injury consistent with being dragged through the backyard and through the defendant's home, which suggests that Joshua was lying about where and how this event started.
And that's going back to her clothes being pulled off.
Exactly.
He was giving the explanation to investigators that it happened while he was dragging her inside, but they're saying, well, if you were dragging her so forcefully that her clothes ripped off, how come there's no other indication of her being dragged, no other injury, no anything? So it just wasn't lining up exactly with the story he told. Right.
And attorneys for the state also pointed out that the baseball that Joshua said hit Maddie in the face, it had no blood on it. And there were no signs of any blood anywhere else in the house other than Joshua's room.
And none of that would really be consistent with the story he told necessarily. The baseball not having blood on it doesn't bother me as much because you can hit someone with a baseball and it would be enough to make an 8-year-old cry without necessarily getting blood on the ball.
Yes, I guess it depends how badly she was hit and bleeding from it. Obviously, if she's dripping blood and there's no drips of blood around the house, that's unusual, I would say.
It's noteworthy. Ultimately, probably not that important, but it's noteworthy.
Yes. And in response to the overwhelming evidence presented by the state, the defense made a bold choice. They didn't call a single witness. Instead, the defense rested following the end of the state's case in chief, and then argued in closing that this wasn't first-degree murder, but that Joshua Phillips panicked and acted with poor judgment, but without the intent required for homicide. And the decision by the defense not to call any witnesses, including Josh, was risky, and it has been the subject of a lot of debate over the years.
And for good reason.
Well, I think what's unusual about it is that they didn't get any experts at all. And, it's just generally, especially due to Joshua Phillips' age, that they could have gotten someone to, testify as to the adolescent brain, impulsivity,
the fear that he was experiencing
due to his father's control.
And I think that's the thing, is it feels like that would have been a stronger defense.
And I just want to say that is obviously not to excuse what he did, but to mitigate. And sometimes the experts aren't there to just say, hey, he did this, let's give him a free pass, right? But it's to just mitigate it, saying, hey, he did X, but this is why he shouldn't be punished as severely as if he...
And that's a defense attorney. And that's a defense attorney's job. That's what they're there to do, and so that's what we would generally expect.
But not calling any witnesses isn't unheard of in trial, and so it's not an objectively bad choice. It's just difficult to imagine defending a case, like this horrible, horrible fact, such a violent, brutal killing, and then not putting up any witnesses or presenting any evidence. It's just...
I had one trial like this once, and the defense didn't put on any witnesses because there really wasn't anything to put on, and I understood it, and I don't think he was doing a poor job, but the jury came back guilty in 14 minutes. So it's not objectively the wrong strategy, but it's tough. It's a bold choice. And
that's the thing. And even if you can't get, any witnesses to say, hey, Josh was a great kid and all this, that's not abnormal with this type of facts.
Sure.
But you would think that they would have been able to find some sort of doctor, even if they didn't want, to have a doctor actually, talk to Josh himself, right? Evaluate him himself, because that is also risky. But to just do it in general terms of what adolescent brains are typically doing, it's just unusual a little bit.
Yeah, it is. And also it's worth noting that Josh's attorney has since passed away, so any questions that might have remained about why he did this,
died with him.
He thought this was best.
Yep. And ultimately, the defense was unsuccessful. After a trial lasting only 2 days, the jury deliberated for about 2 hours before finding Joshua Phillips guilty as charged in the indictment.
And think about that. A homicide trial that takes 2 days and is over. The deliberation is done in 2 hours.
Wow.
Very unusual.
The state had a really solid case.
They did.
I mean, they did.
There's no question.
I don't know what could have honestly been changed, and it really, a lot of it was going to come down to, I think, intent and punishment.
Yeah.
And what was just.
And that was the big thing.
Yes. Joshua Phillips was sentenced to life in prison. Parole was effectively abolished in Florida about 15 years prior to this. So Joshua would never have an opportunity for release. And just to note here that it was and continues to be unconstitutional to sentence a juvenile to death, even if they're tried as an adult. So the death penalty
was never an option.
It was never an option for the state. But that's not the end of this case. Joshua Phillips has long since exhausted his ordinary appellate avenues without success, despite the fact that both the lead prosecutor and the sheriff at the time would later express some regret for the sentence that Joshua Phillips received.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It's interesting, but I mean,
that's not
absolutely horrific.
Yeah, it's not going to change anything. It's just, it's interesting that they have felt that way.
Mm-hmm. And probably do. I mean, he was a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
That's probably why. But a 14-year-old who committed a
heinous crime.
A heinous, yeah. Moreover, evidence would continue to come to light over the years following the trial about the abuse Joshua suffered at the hands of his father, Steve Phillips, who is now deceased. And that is something that could have been used as some mitigation, possibly during sentencing.
Right, even if it couldn't have come in at trial, which it probably could have, but at sentencing, absolutely.
Yeah.
You would
I
like
guess
to
they
think
could have
it
come
would.
in out of the fear of why he acted as with putting her under the mattress and some of the decisions he made then. It has been revealed that Steve Phillips was a drug addict, an alcoholic, and a man with a violent and controlling temperament. And especially noteworthy, although none of this was argued at trial, Steve Phillips had an aversion to little girls. And his ex-wife, Missy, has publicly confirmed this inexplicable bias.
And it is so weird because there is no explanation that has ever been offered as to why he had a problem with little girls.
Thank God he didn't have a daughter, though.
Yeah, right?
Jeez. And stunningly, Steve Phillips went as far as to publicly blame Maddie, the 8-year-old victim, for what happened to her. I mean, he told reporters that none of this would have happened had she not come over to his house to bother his son. And that is just absurd.
I mean, victim blaming is the worst place to go at the best of times, and this was an 8-year-old.
I mean, it's
nuts.
I mean, she was the epitome of an innocent victim.
This was clearly a very sick man.
Oh, yes. And also noteworthy, the defense sought to introduce evidence at trial of bilateral lesions on the frontal lobe of Joshua's brain. But the judge ruled the evidence to be inadmissible, which we don't really know too much about that or what was going on.
We don't.
I do wonder if that's what they were planning and maybe getting a doctor to explain that, but
maybe
I don't know.
Something went wrong. Yeah, you never know. Trial's such a weird thing.
And despite all of these things, Joshua would not be granted a new trial. However, in 2012, things started to change. That year, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision in the case of Miller v. Alabama. And that case found that sentencing a juvenile to mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole is unconstitutional.
And that created a problem for a lot of cases in Florida where we had juveniles who had been sentenced to life in prison, but we don't parole in Florida. So right there, they were problematic.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of cases had to be brought back to court for resentencing.
And they're still happening. We're not done cleaning this up since that changed.
And in 2016, after 17 years in prison, Joshua's attorney successfully argued that he was entitled to a new hearing under the Miller opinion, and he was scheduled to be resentenced. And that resentencing happened in November of 2017. But Joshua Phillips was once again sentenced to life in prison, but now with the mandatory review of his sentence in 2023, which would be the 25 years.
Right, and that has kind of become the de facto answer to these life cases for juvenile is a review every 25 years. So they can be evaluated for growth, development, change, and opportunity for release.
Yep. And we don't know what that review will bring. It's set to happen this year. But, I mean, I think with facts like this, it's pretty unlikely that Joshua will be released.
Yeah, this is pretty egregious, and certainly I think the courts have shown a desire and a willingness to try to release rehabbed juvenile offenders, but these facts are particularly awful.
Yeah.
They're going to he'd have a tough time arguing that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it seems like that Joshua has expressed regret in the years since he committed this horrible crime, but I mean,
there's just no undoing
exactly.
this.
There's just certain crimes you can't undo their damage and the impact that they've had on Maddie's family and on the community.
Yeah, I mean, this one just touched so many people. Yeah. It's hard to imagine coming back from it.
Yeah. And, and honestly, he's been in custody since he was like 14. I mean, I don't know how you would even go about going and living a normal life after that.
No, I mean, ostensibly,
outside of prison.
Ostensibly, he was a 14-year-old who showed really violent tendencies when he committed this crime, and now all he's known is the prison system.
Which generally doesn't make people any kinder.
It does not.
The remaining members of the Clifton family have slowly fallen away from one another, which is the saddest.
It's so
thing.
hard to see
this. And Maddie's parents divorced after this, and her mother moved out of the house. Eventually, Maddie's dad would also leave the home, but Maddie's sister Jessie continues to live there to this day. And she says that the house reminds her of all the great memories she made there with her parents and her little sister. And Maddie Clifton would be turning 33 in just a few weeks. And when you think about it in those terms, like, she was an 8-year-old little girl and she missed out on everything, right? She missed out on
thriving,
on going to middle school, on going to high school, learning to drive, going on a first date, all those dances, going to college, perhaps, and anything that she wanted to do.
She was playing piano, she was playing sports, she had all of these things she loved to do, and she never had a chance to grow in any of those.
Yes. And that is what makes this so tragic too. It's that the life she never got to live because Joshua Phillips did a horrific thing and took that from her, the opportunity for her sister to have a sister. I mean, her sister no longer has that ability to have that relationship. Yeah, she missed out on that relationship, and her parents lost a child, and that's the thing. And he deserves to be punished and to be, held accountable for that.
And for
that loss.
All of that missed opportunity and potential is what makes crimes against juveniles so uniquely horrific.
Yep.
Well, Lydia has been napping adorably for the better part of this episode, for sure.
She did go for a pretty long walk today, smelling a lot of smells, seeing a lot of things.
Got to go to the state park.
She did.
Anyway, we hope you guys enjoyed this one.
As heartbreaking as it is.
Let us know what you think by finding us online at forcrimesake.com or on Facebook or Instagram at forcrimesake. And if you enjoyed the episode, give us a review, follow the show, subscribe, tell your friends.
And we have some pictures. We, of course, posted a picture of Maddie Clifton and some other, definitely a picture of Lydia. And go check that out.
And if you guys ever have a case you'd like us to cover, let us know. Send us an email at info@forcrimesake.com or just let us know on social media.
And thanks for listening. We hope you all have a great week, and we'll be back next Monday.